Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I only just was able to join, but it was already very interesting listening to Sabine. I'm replacing Diederik Samsom, whom is very occupied with the European Council right now on climate issues. So it's my pleasure to be with you, at least for this intervention. I'm afraid I also cannot stay afterwards for the debate. And it's upon me to talk a little bit more on let's say, the policy context that we're looking at and the role of carbon removals in, the transition towards a climate neutral Europe in 2050. Now, only a month ago or so, we had the agreement on the European climate law. And in there already, we are very clear on the importance of carbon removals. The law sets the climate neutrality objective to net zero by 2050, and also clearly points to the aim of achieving negative emissions thereafter. And of course, it also talks about the need to enhance the EU's natural carbon sink. So this is the legal framework we have in place. I also want to recall the long-term strategy that we published in November 2018, which also shows different pathways of how this objective of climate neutrality can be achieved. Now, it is, I think by now, very, very clear that any pathway towards climate neutrality entails, a pretty drastic reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in all sectors of the EU economy. And this is, of course, the aim, of our climate and energy policies. We need to reduce our reliance on carbon by improving the energy efficiency of buildings, transport modes, industries, and basically by replacing fossil fuels with low carbon energy carriers, such as renewable electricity or hydrogen. Now, our policies so far have driven already a 24% reduction in emissions between 1990 and 2019, pre-COVID, and they remain essential to the achievement of the minus 55% by 2030, as we have again set in the climate law. Now, we also recognize that part of the EU economy, even by 2050, will still require carbon to function properly, and beyond, even after 2050. Here you can think of the production of plastics, rubbers, chemicals, other advanced materials that also require carbon as a feedstock. But virgin fossil carbon will be replaced by more sustainable streams of carbon. And here you can think of waste, biomass, but also directly from the atmosphere to supply the organic chemistry for the synthesis of innovative products, again, construction materials or sustainable synthetic fuels. But again, even with our best effort to limit fossil fuels in the economy, there will be some remaining emissions, and notably in agriculture, aviation, perhaps also in industry. So we need carbon removals, both nature-based, but also technology-based, and these removals will be needed to compensate for the remaining emissions. So to dive a little bit deeper in the nature-based solutions, clearly we need to manage our ecosystems in a way that is good, and I would say much better than it is today, for climate and for biodiversity. The efforts that are being made in that respect should be better recognized. And for this purpose, we will be proposing an update of our land use policy. This will be part of the Fit for 55 package, as we call it, that is due for adoption by the Commission in July. But we will also be revising a forest strategy. So that will set the overall context when it comes to forests. Another important element is to ensure that the farmers and the foresters, who are the ones who can create carbon removals at large scale, that they get the right incentive to do so. Clearly today, farmers are not obliged or even directly encouraged to put in place practices to store more carbon in the soil. And the Common Agricultural Policy, the CAP, has a role to play in this regard, and we're of course working on that. In parallel, we're also working on a dedicated carbon farming initiative, as was announced already more than a year ago in the Farm to Fork strategy and in the Circular Economy Action Plan. And this carbon farming initiative aims at addressing directly the farmers and support those who want to contribute actively to climate action, because rewarding the farmers and the foresters via such a carbon farming initiative can really create new innovative business opportunities, and thereby, of course, also new sources of income. So the carbon farming initiative, in our view, will be very helpful to learn from the ground what works best to remove carbon efficiently and sustainably, obviously, from the atmosphere, and in a way that it can be robustly monitored. We have recently, you may have noticed, published the final report of a 2-year study on how to set up and implement carbon farming in the EU. And we call this a technical guidance handbook, which is available on the Klima website, the DG Klima website. I just wanted to flag that to you. Now, we know already what are the promising technologies for capturing, storing, or recycling CO2. For instance, the bioenergy associated with CCS, the BECCS, the direct air capture and carbon capture and use, CCU technologies, I think by now are quite well known, and they all produce a variety of products, be it synthetic fuels, chemicals, building materials, cement, etc. Now, we also know that we need to remove some barriers that these technologies and their take-up are currently facing. These can be economic, but they can also be related, as I think we all very well know from the past, to social acceptance. Now, an important new kid on the block, so to say, is the Innovation Fund that is set up under the emissions trading system, and that supports these technologies. It really seems we have, a year ago launched the work under the Innovation Fund, and it does look like it can be a great success for the first call, because we had more than 300 large-scale projects that were submitted, and out of those, 70 have been selected for the second step. And this includes very interesting projects with net carbon removal potentials. Now, recently, we also launched a call for small projects, and this also turns out to be very successful, and we have had more than 200 applications. So we believe that these projects will prove that these barriers are only temporary and can be removed. And also a higher carbon price that will be the result of our increased overall climate ambition will, of course, help to create a stronger business case for carbon removals. But now let me talk a little bit about, again, the regulatory environment. We do need new instruments to deploy carbon removal solutions, as I said, nature-based, technology-based, and at a scale compatible with our climate neutrality objective, which is really the point we're working towards. I think that is important to always keep in mind. And this is why we are working hard on this new regulatory framework for the certification of carbon removals, because the robust monitoring and reporting is essential for the integration of carbon removals with other climate policies. And this is really our first priority. Issues such as baseline, additionality for nature-based solutions are quite challenging. We have to admit that. So we need a credible governance framework to allow only for authentic, transparent, and verifiable carbon removals to be certified, and that we ensure that we have appropriate accounting also for carbon removals in place. So on the basis of all the work we're doing now, we intend to propose a mechanism that guarantees the same quality of carbon removals across member states. Again, the question of permanence of the removals and therefore the liability in case carbon is reverted into the atmosphere are key. The implementation of certification should also be, we need to keep that in mind, it should remain feasible at a reasonable cost and prevent, too high administrative burden that would actually hamper the deployment of carbon removals. So many things to keep in mind. And that is why, this regulatory framework, the certification framework, if put in place in a proper manner, it would have the potential to mobilize the financial resources necessary to provide this incentive to carbon removals, and for the carbon removals, again, to support the additional climate action. So how fast do we need the certification framework for carbon removals? Well, I already mentioned we need to really start building that framework already now, but need to keep in mind that it needs to last and that we kind of minimize trials and errors. But at the same time, we recognize that probably there will be some trials and errors, and we should also not hurry at the cost of quality. So we need to be mindful that both technological and economic factors will keep evolving while we develop and implement the framework. So we need an approach that incorporates the learning while limiting the regulatory uncertainties from having too frequent reviews or revisions. Now, before already thinking of using or even trading certificates, I think in our view, it is crucial that we ensure the trust in the mechanism with a credible supply, basically regulations that allow this stepwise development and integration of carbon removals, as I mentioned it, and that we start with the most mature and robust solutions. So I think for the coming into being of the carbon removal certification approach, we really have to avoid a race to the bottom. We need to look at the demand for robustly certified removals, but that does not seem to be the most difficult part. We see many people out there interested in buying such certificates. We can also think about many potential applications in the long term, access to public money. You can think of voluntary markets or even compliance markets. But again, we need to keep in mind that none of this would really contribute efficiently to EU climate action in the midterm and in the long term if the environmental integrity of the supply of these certificates is not fully guaranteed in the first step. Now, I come to the end of my reflections, but just want to share with you what are the next steps. So as I'm sure you know, we are currently working very hard on the revision of our whole panoply of climate and energy policies, this Fit for 55 package that we will be putting forward, that the Commission will be adopting in terms of proposals in July. And in there, we will have, also the revision of the policies relevant for carbon removals. And of course, there I'm thinking in the first place of the land use change and forestry regulation, but also the EU emissions trading system. This will come in July, as I said. Then more specifically, even towards the end of the year, we hope to present our approach to carbon removals, carbon recycling, the different roles of the two initiatives on the certification of carbon removals and carbon farming. So lots of work ahead, and that is why we are looking forward to stakeholders' views, such as the one Sabine has already been putting forward, but also from the rest of the program, because this will really feed our work in view of a legislative proposal on a regulatory framework for the certification of carbon removals by 2023. It sounds maybe far away, but it isn't so far away. And as I said, we have a lot of work to do to ensure a robust framework and the social acceptability so that this can really take off. And with that, I will again leave you, unfortunately, but I'm sure I will be receiving the feedback also from the discussions you're having. And I wish you the best of luck for the workshop.